You're having generational wealth go in reverse. People that their grandfathers built these buildings back in the 1930s and 40s are having massive financial distress. We just paid a tenant $300,000 to leave. If you don't pay rent in New York City, it'll take 3 to 4 years to actually get to the point where a landlord has a warrant for eviction, and then you're not going to get the money back. We have many tenants that don't pay for 2 or 3 years, and then you're actually still giving them a check just to give you possession of the unit back. Because you're not even trying to get the back rent. You're just like, give me the apartment back. Just please, just leave.
Owners, if you're considering selling, do it right now. It's not going to get any better anytime soon. So introducing Shaun Riney, leads and is a managing partner at the New York multifamily team at Marcus and Millichap. And Shaun has sold assets in virtually every subcategory, from affordable LIHTC, Section 8 HUD, contract buildings, to traditional rent stabilized apartments, to brand new luxury housing and complexes. Additionally, he's also an owner and investor. So today we'll be discussing the impact rent control has in New York City and what we can expect in Washington State if HB 2114 were to pass in Q1 of 2025, or any other rent restrictive programs. So to summarize the main points we'll be talking about, first, we'll learn about Shaun's experience with rent control in New York City. Then we'll discuss what type of rent control is being proposed in Seattle and Washington State. And then at the last part of the discussion, we'll discuss the rent control myths and maybe even some solutions we have.
Great, Jerrid. So, I'm pretty pumped.
Awesome.
Let's get rocking.
Thanks for joining us.
What do you want to know about New York City rent control? It's a loaded gun.
Yeah, you and I did some prep work, and I was like, we should just recorded that. It was all gold. So I guess, could you give us a brief breakdown what the difference between like rent controlled and rent stabilized is in New York City?
And today they're kind of synonymous, so I won't spend too much time on that. But essentially, any building built before 1974 got a form of regulation put on it where the in-occupant tenant was allowed succession rights. They can stay as long as they want, and there was a governor on the amount of annual increase that you could raise that tenant that had the rights to stay as long as they wanted every single year. That was kind of the general way of things for quite some time. And generally, the rent guideline board increases would be nominal. But they were never really designed. You could never really improve your income dramatically until you got a vacancy. And when you got a vacancy, that was when you could, kind of chutes and ladders to market by spending a certain amount of money. So the old law, before we had this disaster in 2019, which we'll dive into, which changed the dynamics of the rent regulation into so far of an extreme that it's completely devalued and bankrupted the city. But the old way used to be you get one of these old rent stabilized units back, meaning the tenant finally just decides they don't want to walk up 5 flights of stairs. They take a buyout, they go buy a home, whatever. Life, moves on. Some people passed away in the units. At that moment, you used to be able to spend a certain amount of money, basically 2.5% of whatever you spent on the apartment. So you spent $40,000, you can raise the rent $1,000. And then the next tenant would have succession rights forever. But there was an off ramp. So you could actually exit the stabilization by spending enough money. When you finally recover that unit after maybe 30 years of occupancy, you could actually take it to market rate. And so basically that mechanism allowed you could subsidize the rents of all the artificially low rents of the rent stabilized units, which generally operate at a loss, because eventually you'd have these pops in income when somebody were to finally vacate. You could go to market and you'd counteract the loss you're taking on the rent stabilized units with the market rate units in the building.
Okay.
And
so with the rent stabilized units, are there any tax incentives or any benefits to the owner for offering these affordable units?
No, and that's part of the pitch, and we're trying to get it to the unconstitutionality of it. But it's essentially the private market is doing the government's bidding for it by basically housing people below the cost to even operate the unit, but they're getting no benefit from it. So private owners in New York City are essentially doing the government's job for no compensation. And again, the system used to kind of work. We used to rent stabilized investing in New York City used to be a very it might take a long time to make money, but it was sustainable, predictable, and reliable because you had this artificially lower income stream that you could eventually just like predict that it's going to go up. It takes a long time, people have to
Yeah.
leave, but you'd have this gradual, road up, and pension funds would invest into it, and very patient money.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 2019, they basically froze in time every rent in the city. So there's some
So no,
exceptions to
someone moves
this.
out, you're not able to move it to market.
Correct. So in New York City,
Wow.
there's by some accounts 30 to 50,000 vacant apartments that are already just boarded up because it's more economical for the owner to just leave them vacant than it is to put another life estate tenant in there at $800 a month in rent when the cost to operate the unit with heat and water and everything else is 1,400 a unit.
I remember
So
listening to your podcast. A comment was made that expense loads, so the percent of the income that goes to expenses was about 35%, has escalated about 60%.
yeah, I
Has
mean
that happened recently? What's been that cause?
it depends on where the rents are in the building, but
True.
since these new 2019 rent laws were passed, you have no way to grow your income, so the expenses are growing disproportionately to the flat income.
Mm-hmm.
Insurance is going out of control.
Out of
Insurance
control.
companies are smart. Why would they keep insuring properties that have zero chance of appreciating, that are depreciating? And everything's just up. I mean, we have the system becomes more and more about lawsuits and all these ways to just really just penalize the private owner in the marketplace. So I mean, it's hard to describe what kind of system we have in New York City currently, but it's going to zero if they don't change things, and that's what has been happening, because no
Mm.
business can survive on 1980 income in 2024. If you know of any grocery store that can sell at 1980 prices and pay 2024 wages, let me know. But there's
Yeah.
no business on earth, including housing, which is extremely capital and management and time intensive, that can survive with a frozen rent structure based upon decades ago with these
Yeah.
occupancies that have been there into today's 2024 expenses. So just to hit one more point, you used to be able to raise the rent on a vacant apartment. Now the only rent that you're allowed to charge the next tenant in 2024 is what the previous tenant was paying, many times, which is locked in this 30-year-old $800 a month, $847 a month. So there's all these units that need hundreds of thousands of dollars, at least $100,000, to renovate and make habitable again, and then you're supposed to rent it for $800 when the cost to just maintain the unit, forget about even a mortgage payment, is $1,200 a unit. It makes
Mm.
no sense. So people are just boarding up the doors and praying that somehow common sense returns to our legislature, but they're doubling down. They're just making things worse and worse.
So, layman looking in, I was thinking the pandemic caused this, but it sounds like this legislation in 2019 caused this. Why? What led to that legislation? You guys already had rent control. Something happened in 2019. What was it?
I mean, partly I think it could have been a reaction to, Trump becoming the president, and there was just a left backlash against the quote unquote real estate developer from New York City, even though he has nothing to do with New York City real estate and apartments anymore. I think overall it was a political strategy, right? It's the same, every free party is fun until you run out of money, right? Like, no one should pay for education. No one should pay for groceries. No one should pay for housing. Free rent, cancel rent. It's a political slogan on a bumper sticker that's designed to win votes. And they
Mm.
basically created a hate against landlords in New York City to rile people up. And there's still that movement going on, but it's all political strategy to say, we're going to freeze your rent. We're going to freeze your expenses. Landlords are all evil and bad. We're your savior. And it was a
Yeah.
political movement, and it works, and it
Hmm.
continues to work. And the politicians across our country are seeing the success of New York in exploiting that. And that's why this is happening in other places. It's all about power and money behind it. But it's at the end of the day, it's just like anything. You promise people free things and they vote for you, even though it's like every socialist experiment ends in a breadline. Like, this is no different.
Okay. So what? I mean, zooming in a little bit to my clients, your clients, how has this affected the property values of these buildings?
So before 2019, when they passed the rent laws, we were probably similar to some of the other places in the country. We were at 15 times the gross rent, 14 times the gross rent, because people used to be willing to suffer a low cap rate for that predictable, reliable, long-term growth. But
Mm-hmm.
now it's kind of flipped on its head where we're down to 5 times rent roll, 6 times rent roll in certain markets. Like people are now where they used to buy 4% cap rate buildings are now 9% cap rate buildings if they're sellable at all. There's many properties that I just can't sell for even $1. There's just no
Why
hope
why
for
not
them
buy a 9 cap?
because you're still at the mercy of tenants that have all the rights that just call violations. There might be work that needs to be done. It's just not a lifestyle that many people want to enter into where there's no clear way to grow NOI at all,
Gotcha.
with this system. So
There's no control over your business plan. You just
yeah, there's exactly. And the people that are buying, and I am still selling these properties, are simply
yeah,
making a gamble that they can survive longer than the city can afford to not change these laws. It's purely a political gamble that I'm buying it cheaper than 98% of the people that already bought this, that already own this stuff, and the whole city will have to declare bankruptcy before I, have to go bankrupt. So
yeah.
at
So
the
what's
new
going to cause the
valuations,
city to
people can deal with it.
what's going to cause the city to crumble or break on this legislation, if anything?
This kind of happened already in the past. Some people have heard Bronx is burning. That was in the
Yep.
1980s. That what precipitated that was a crazy form of rent control, just like we have now. So people, buildings were basically abandoned, and then people lit them on fire to try to get the insurance proceeds. That was, quote unquote, the Bronx is burning. Now, people today aren't going to light the buildings on fire because there's people in them, but the capitulation is no different. So what's going to happen, what's going to have them change. I thought by now we would have already changed. I'm a common sense Democrat at heart. I'm like, this is just pure lunacy what's going on. But at the end of the day, until it hits the tax rolls, until there's no more social safety net that's created by property taxes, because people are still hanging on, but until those tax rolls start really getting affected, and they are now, people cannot pay property taxes anymore, and it finally hits the city that you have choked the very source of funding that feeds you.
Hmm.
New York City property tax provides 44% of the budget. And
Wow.
so when you have the office pain that we're going on, and plus the rent regulated space with Signature Bank failing, New York Community Bank needing a lifeline, it's all because of their exposure to this rent regulated product that was
Hmm.
just completely bankrupted by these laws. It's a completely political, cause problem, and it could be solved politically in 2 seconds, but you have a lot of entrenched interests in this whole I hate landlords campaign.
So to solve the solution would be retract whatever was put in 2019. Allow a landlord to move the rent to market when someone in a rent restricted unit moved out. Is that what
That
you're
in of
asking
itself
for?
would help dramatically. It would lower the cost of housing for existing tenants. We're just working with a dwindling supply, so rents are higher and higher on the unregulated apartments because there's just 40 to 50,000 units just sitting vacant, boarded up. So there's less and less supply every year.
What
So
happens when those owners stop paying their taxes? Does the city own their building pretty quickly?
no, it takes forever to take back a building through tax liens. That's part of our problem too, is our courts take forever. So you don't have to pay rent here, take in 3 years to recover the rent if you ever get it at all. And the same, fortunately for owners, the same thing works with, property taxes. It'll take them a long time to put a lien on the property, but people are stopping paying taxes. I'm one of them. There's certain properties that we just can't pay the taxes anymore. We got
Yeah.
to keep the heat going and got to keep the building maintained, but we can't pay the taxes. The taxes will just accrue, and eventually they'll have to take back the building, I guess.
Have you had any clients have their buildings taken back by the city? And if so, does the city utilize it as housing, or is that just a
Uh,
non-use supply now?
the city hasn't gotten to that level through the courts yet.
Hmm.
But again, going back to the 1980s when this happened again, most of my current or a lot of my current clients bought the buildings from the city for $1 back then, because the deal that the city made was, we will give you these abandoned buildings for $1. When they finally realized that they had gone too far, we'll give you these buildings for $1. You just need to fix them up. So they
Hmm.
were giving the buildings away for free, because the last time they finally realized, after so much pain and a fiscal crisis, that, oh my God, we have to incentivize private housing to rehabilitate these properties.
Yeah.
So no, that hasn't happened yet, but I mean, I think that there's probably a greater strategy of devaluing properties so that the government can buy them from private owners, but at the depressed prices that they've now caused. And you are
Yeah.
starting to see that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's
Interesting.
pretty wild. What's going on, in Seattle with the rent laws? What's being proposed? I feel like New York City is literally just 3 or 4 years ahead of
Yeah.
everything else that's going to happen in some of these other gateway cities. And my message to your clients is, like, do not think that this will not happen, because it will
Yeah.
happen to you.
Yeah.
It-
It's
it's
not a matter of if, it's when, is what we're hearing a lot from everything from legislatures to attorneys that are pretty involved at a state level. So the things that have already happened were more pandemic related.
Mhm,
So what started was restrictions on requirements to pay rent, which caused some major issues for quite a few clients. We even have some now. It's 2024. They still have a couple residents that have never paid rent since they moved in 2020. So that
mhm.
was one piece. It was like this, emergency. Let's take care of these people. The next one was a winter eviction ban. So if you stop paying rent and Seattle winters kind of last forever. But I think it was between September and February, September and March, no evictions. If you have a child under a certain age, no evictions. If you're over a certain age, no evictions. So there's a lot of different things preventing landlords from being able to require people to pay rent. And now, from what I can recall, the thing that's impacting owners the most is, although there's no rent control allowed in the state of Washington, we have a rental increase restriction of 10%. So it's in effect rent control, but it's part of some leftover legislation from the pandemic. So those are the ones that are affecting us day to day that really no one voted on. They just were implemented. But what I can shift to next is reading through a couple things that have been proposed at a city and a state level, and we can talk about how those might impact things even more in Seattle.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
curious. I mean, what are the general cap rates that a regular apartment building would sell for now? That's kind of in the affordable space, not the high end, but the normal workforce housing type of property.
It always varies, as you know, with how it's operated today. But given that there's no rent control, I can still sell a building at a 3% cap rate if we can land it, clear up in a 6.5. Just because maybe the expense load's out of whack. They're running it as a family. They're treating it as a piggy bank. Haven't raised rents. So I'd say that's one scenario. If I took like a blended middle of that, I'd say the 20s to 60s product that's ready for value add is probably trading closer to the 5 cap range, and they want to stabilize in the sixes. And then the newer stuff, we're starting to get back into the upper 4% range. The lowest we got on a market basis was only 5 or 6 trades, and they're about 5.25.
So these are all extremely low cap rates. If you're out
Extremely low
there
cap
and
rates.
you're on the fence and this is coming down the pike, do not think twice. Sell.
Yeah.
Like I,
So you're
I
at a
can.
9 cap.
Well, we are for some troubled assets,
Yeah.
and there's certain properties that, I mean, we can. There's so many elements of this rent control scheme that I can get into that just won't make any sense, but they're so punitive, like rent rollbacks back to the 1980s and what we call treble damages, where if you can't prove how you renovated the unit, the rent gets rolled back. It's crazy thing. Tenants are getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to just go away in many situations, funded by the attorneys that are profiting off of it. So
Yeah.
it's a whole cottage industry that's being created. Um,
Wow.
but that 3 to 6% cap rate trade that is based upon that upside, like that is the ticking time bomb client that is just
Yeah.
waiting to get completely devalued. Because
Totally.
in New York City with these laws, the people that were nice to the tenants, that were the old mom and pops that just were giving their tenants a break, those are the ones that get hurt the most because they get fixed at this low rent. All
Yeah.
of a sudden, you're just capped. You can't raise the rent on this building from 1,000 to 1,500,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, overnight with these controls, a buyer says, I don't want to pay a 3 cap for that. I need to pay a 7 cap for that because there's no upside anymore. These people will never leave.
Yep.
It literally penalizes the very people that are helping tenants the
Yep.
most.
Yep.
So
And it's the city's regulation outside of even rent control, but passing brand new laws. It felt like by the week during the pandemic, where you couldn't collect late charges, you couldn't screen tenants, you couldn't do all these things. Causes my primary client is probably 70 to 80-year-old mom and pop. They're
mhm.
offering good market rate affordable housing, and they're putting their hands up saying, I can't deal with it anymore. And the clients I sell them all to are professional operators, syndicators, right? Their own management company. They know how to operate them well. They improve the quality of the asset. They also increase the rent. So in effect, with legislation, we've removed a lot of the naturally occurring affordable housing. And then if we pass rent control, we're going to completely ruin this. I don't foresee sales happening if someone that's operated at that affordable rate for so long finds out we now can sell them for a 7 cap. I
Well,
mean, that means they're getting 300,000 unit. Now they're going to give them 120. There's no way they're going to sell it.
yeah, they won't overnight, but
Yeah.
again, in my personal experience, even if you're one of these people that doesn't do anything and these rent laws are passed, our rent laws were passed June 2019. I had some people that sold right before them, and I had
Mm.
certain people that just ripped the band-aid off right when these laws passed and was like, I'm getting rid of it. And those prices were still 11 or 12 times the rent roll. Every single year that this law has been in place and wears on, it kind of keeps becoming part of the consciousness. The rent multiples, the gross rent multiples have gone one 10 times, 9 times, 8 times. We are now between 5 to 7 times rent roll. So sometimes even
So
if the
relate that
laws
to
are
a cap rate for what's 15, because we don't do as GRM as frequently as you do. So 15 times the rent roll is like a 4 cap.
that used to be your 3 and 4 cap. Our market
3 and 4
was
cap.
exactly what you're describing. Your market is today. And now
Okay.
it's basically inverted.
Okay.
And there's categories like all the capital here is chasing the very small supply of buildings that are unregulated for little exceptions. But the typical 60 unit pre-war built in 1930s apartment building is trading at best 6 to 7 times rent roll, which is a 50% loss in value. So many of
Wow.
these owners have, even if they were quote unquote, low leverage at 50% loan to value, they're now underwater. They can't pay their debt service. They have considerable, depreciation recapture, even if they were to turn it into the bank and just say, I'm willing to walk away.
Yeah.
So they're kind of stuck, and they feel like, I'm not trying to be over dramatic, but it's kind of feels like life and death for these people. I mean, I go to pitch meetings and people are holding their hands under the table, shaking about what I'm about to tell them,
Mm.
because they have done this business the right way for 30 years, and the government just came and basically did eminent domain without any type of payout,
Mm-hmm.
and they can't get out of it. They can't quit this job. They're
Yeah.
not able to just walk away because they're underwater. Like the bank's like, no, keep taking care of the property. We don't want to manage it.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people in this, kind of trap right now that's been created, and it's sad and it's not helpful for the tenants because there's capitulation going on where the buildings aren't being taken care of because there's no money to take care of them anymore.
Yeah.
So the services are going to go away. Like the boiler
Yeah.
breaks this winter, if the capital account in these buildings is already to zero or negative, we're at that point where there's not another $40,000 to just go fix one of these old broken parts in these old buildings anymore, because there's no
Yeah.
hope of ever recovering that money.
Yeah.
And so I would just say, you know, I didn't say this loud enough because I was in the seat in New York City, and it always sounds self-serving to say sell when you're a broker. But I can
Yeah.
say that to your owners because I'm not profiting a dollar off this. Like, it is whatever they say they're going to do in the legislature, it's a winning political strategy, and they will do it. And you have time to do something about it now. Like, if you're in it for the long haul, so be it. But if you're 70 years old and you can sell at a 3 cap and get out of this, do not wait. Like, learn from our mistakes. Like,
Yeah.
it's a it's a dial that gets turned up a little bit. What you mentioned, 10% or something like that's not bad. And honestly, we're fine with a form of regulation. We've been dealing with it for 30 years. Like we actually
Yeah.
don't want to gouge tenants. But
Yeah.
this idea here that when you get a vacant apartment, you can only charge the next tenant what the previous one that was there for 30 years was charged is
Yeah.
just crazy. And it's just one of these things where they start with a certain regulation, and then every year what we've experienced is they turn the dials a little, they cringe it a little bit more and a little
Yeah.
bit more and a little bit
Yeah.
more. And all of a sudden you're left with 5 times the gross rent roll and a 7 to 8% cap rate, marketplace if you're lucky.
Okay. So what's proposed at a state level, it's called House Bill 2114. The legislature finds that the state is in the midst of a housing affordability crisis. Homes cannot be built fast enough to meet the urgent need to keep families, seniors, and all Washington renters housed. Their limits would be to limit rent increases to 7%. The notification period for increasing rents is 180 days for any increases over 3%. The tenant would be able to terminate a lease within 20 days if the increase is over 7%. And then the tenant would receive damages up to 3 months rent.
So
It
this
would also,
damages thing is straight from New York. This whole idea of damages, by the way, this is
okay,
all from the New York playbook.
uh, we'll unpack it. Last few ones: late fees, $10, limit move-in fees to security deposit of 1 month rent. All these exist in Seattle anyways. And then exempt government housing authorities from all rent control, which was fascinating too. So 7% maximum. If it's over 3%, 180 days. If it's over 7, damages for 3 months. Let's unpack that one. How has that played out in New York?
I mean, this is where it starts. 7% increase is fine. We would happily take that, but then the next year they're going to go to 2%. We've had a rent freeze for like 3 or 4 years, basically, like 1% increases. Like it's the start. They start with the mechanism and then it changes, and
Yeah.
then it crimps on you.
Yeah.
And again, I have no problem. We have no problem. Owners have no problem with, if the government wants private owners to do the government's job for them, then just reduce the taxes. Okay, keep rent increases at a rate of inflation, but stop raising taxes. That, or give us tax relief. But this idea that you can kind of freeze rents and basically provide affordable housing, that the government should be taking care of while you're still paying a market rate tax bill. That's the other. So that's what we're pushing for now. It's like, all right, keep the rents frozen like you're doing, but give us the property tax relief, because without that, there's no way to survive.
Yeah. How have they used this? So damages feels like a very open-ended claim. Is this where you get into what are tenants receiving when economically evicted in New York City?
Oh, it has nothing to do with evictions in New York City. Well, one, this is just straight fact. If you don't pay rent in New York City, it'll take 3 to 4 years to actually get to the point where a landlord has a warrant for eviction, and then you're not going to get the money back. You're just basically like, we have many tenants that don't pay for 2 or 3 years, and then you're actually still giving them a check just to give you possession of the unit back, because you're not even trying to get the back rent. You're just like, give me the apartment back, just please, just leave. And so it's not just the forgiveness of the rent, it's you're literally giving them a buyout check on the way out just to finally leave the property, leave my life.
Wow.
So
what do those checks look like? Like order of magnitude?
Depends how much the tenant wants to be a bad person. There's a professional game out there going on, and it's, some people literally can't pay the rent, and we have a lot of compassion for those people, and there's programs that owners are working with to work through that. And then there's a whole other class that's just educated to play the game and play the, I'm gonna just try to be a nuisance and get some buyout money. And everyone thinks they deserve a buyout here, basically, for
Wow.
for just being a renter. It just
So
become part of the
buyouts
consciousness.
from the pandemic, non-payers we had in Seattle, I'd say the lowest I'd heard was a couple months rent, so call it like $2,500, and the highest I heard was probably around like 15,000. Is that similar for buyouts that you've seen, or they higher?
Oh, it can be way higher. I mean,
Oh.
we just paid a tenant $300,000 to leave. You know, I had one tenant that completely fabricated, all kinds of things, and saying the issues of the apartment was, health, blah blah blah. At the end of the day, we finally got in front of her, and she's like, "I just want $25,000," and we have it, please, because there's a quality of life when you're worried about things all the time and having sleepless nights, like I was just here, take the money. So it's a real toxic environment, and it starts with all these good sounding things like rent control, but it's metastasized here into a really toxic environment, and there's a lot of legal that's profiting off of it.
So
And
attorneys that are,
yeah, it's just there's a real underbelly. It's hard to describe without sounding conspiracy theorist, but there's a real underbelly that's at work in the New York City housing regime.
interesting. So it sounds like on the surface, this rent control proposed at our state level in Washington doesn't sound bad. 7%, you got to keep a month's deposit. These things sound pretty good. So short-term impact, you're saying, is owners. If you're considering selling, do it right now. Like it's not going to get any better anytime soon.
I'm just trying to explain that everyone in New York City thinks the same way that your owner thought, the same way that your owners are thinking now. This, okay, doesn't sound so bad, and then it gets worse. Or they're not going to do that. That sounds crazy. And then they do. So every single time that we have thought here that there's no way they could do that, that is just absolutely crazy. It happens. They pass it. And it just going further, now we have universal rent control on basically everything, which is similar to what you have, even on the market rate properties. But still, there's no relief in sight for all these vacant warehouse units, which makes no sense when they're up on the news, complaining about the lack of affordable housing. There's literally tens of thousands of vacant apartments just sitting boarded up, and they know it. It's kind of similar to the whole, border thing or anything else. It's just when you create a problem and then you try to sell somebody the solution, like you are the problem. Like, like it's not. It's hypocrisy at its finest level here. But I'm just saying, there are a lot of owners. They're just at that point. Even if they were to pass what you just described, that's not so bad yet. Just
not yet.
Then yes, exactly. Sell now. You'll still get maybe from a 3 cab, maybe people adjust to a 4 cab. But you wait another year and they'll go further, and you wait another year and they'll go further. And it's just it's like it's like the frog in the boiling water. It's like it just eventually you realize you're fried to death, but you didn't jump out of the pot when you could have had the chance, when you saw that this was going to just be a road that you're going down.
Interesting.
And again,
so and that leads me to the next question. So short-term impact, maybe it doesn't seem bad. It's going to get worse. Long-term impact, we could be in a situation like you are, where we're boarding up buildings because now our expenses are much greater than our income, and it doesn't make any sense to keep paying your taxes and keep the building operating. Is that the long term?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Seattle will get to the point that New York City is. Like, it's, it just seems, again, so bad that you have all these vacant units and you're not, in your system, no matter what, when a tenant vacates, you're allowed to charge a market rent. Like that's what's missing here. We don't mind regulation on existing tenancies, especially at 7-8%. No one really raises their existing tenants more than that anyway.
Yeah.
Never. It's like never happens. You want to maintain occupancy, keep a steady, predictable, reliable income stream. You're not looking to rock the boat. But what they've done here is they basically said on vacant apartments, you're going to need to roll back the rent. And I think that's probably where I would hope that no other cities get to, but we'll see what happens. Just sounds like if you're on the fence there, and you're at that stage of your life, what are you waiting for? Because I have a lot of those types of clients that just didn't do it, and now they like kind of have to stay with them, and they're in their 70s, like they're past retirement age. And it's just sad because it can't really help anymore.
I mean, that was shocking when you said to me, I've got so many clients like yours that have low leverage, right? 50%, 40% loans. Just to imagine, I'm thinking of one in particular, is 84 years old. To imagine that we didn't sell his building in like we wanted to in 2022. Now he's held it. This passes, a couple more years goes by, and now his $8 million loan he's upside down on. It's unfathomable, but it just happened. I mean, people say rent control has been in place in New York for as long as it has. However, the legislation that's causing this has only been there for 5 years.
Correct. You're having generational wealth go in reverse. People that their grandfathers built these buildings back in the 1930s and 40s are having massive financial distress. So this is rolling back, going in reverse, like generations of hard sweat equity, because people, if the values are down, some are down, 50, 60, 70%. If you had even 40% loan to value when the laws were different, you're now at par, and your basis is zero from a tax standpoint. So even if you were to just give the keys back to the lender and have the debt forgiven, you still owe depreciation recapture because your basis is zero.
Yeah.
So it's not easy being a broker in New York City right now, and it's even harder. Crazy. It's even harder being a property owner. We got to get rid of this whole landlord term. It's so feudal and not even remotely close to what the experience is. It's property servant more than anything.
We like to go with housing providers.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah,
landlords feels like it's from the Bible.
Yeah, it's just not how it works anymore.
I want to jump to some things I read on Seattle's websites. This is on seattle.gov, and they've got like what they call myth busting. So I'll read a couple of them and see what you think. So one of the ones says, rent control doesn't work. All the experts agree. So that's a myth, according to Seattle. And Seattle says, doesn't work for whom? Big developers and real estate companies who profit off gouging renters don't like rent control. However, studies show that renters in housing with rent control are much less likely to be displaced, and they have lower rent.
They do have lower rent if they're fixed, but overall for everyone else, it is way more expensive. So the people that do benefit from rent control, the types of real estate are the brand new buildings, because the existing supply can't be turned over, can't be freshened up. And so the only supply that gets created is new construction buildings, and those rents are sky high, and they're sky high because there's not enough supply of apartments. I mean, we all know this intuitively. If there's no more baby formula being produced, the existing price of baby formula that all babies need is going to go up. It's supply and demand. Yeah. So when you put rent restrictions on existing supply, it's going to make the prices of what is available go up. And so here, the only way you can create new housing is new construction. So those new construction rents are really, really high.
Interesting.
And again, just to go a little step further, like we don't mind rent regulation in a form that allows for a modest increase, as long as when you do recover a unit, you can finally take it to market and put it back to life. But what's also happening in New York City is there's areas that used to have a lot of renaissance going on, and they used to have a lot of money being spent on them. The neighborhoods were shifting over. It wasn't gentrification, it wasn't displacement. It was the new coffee shop. It was the new restaurant. It was, fringe neighborhoods kind of getting their groove back. And now the last 5 years, those neighborhoods are going backwards. They're getting more unsafe. There's no new businesses opening up. It's a divestment instead of an investment. And that's what happens when you put all these constrictions on everything, and you're basically telling people, don't come here, don't invest here, don't try to improve the block, because there's no benefit to you here. And so New York City, the market is really confined to like the best areas. That's where all the investment activity is, because there's less regulation there, because the rents are already high and there's a lot more new buildings. A lot of the B minus, C plus workforce housing areas, they don't feel the same way anymore. And that's just going to keep happening. And it's sad, because there's no new money that's being spent on those blocks anymore. And people are kind of capitulating. They're the front door bus. They don't have the pride of ownership anymore to fix the front door. Like there's just no money in it.
That's interesting.
So you got to pay attention to the overall welfare of an economy when it comes to the effects of these regulations. It's going to overall affect the tax revenue of the city. It's going to affect the desirability of people that want to come there. It makes the
Yeah.
rents in the more expensive neighborhoods even higher, which therefore, that's why people are going to Florida and other neighborhoods, because New York City rents for where you actually want to live are just too unconscionably high. But they're unconscionably
Mm-hmm.
high because we can't create new apartments out of the existing stock. It's just locked
Gotcha.
in a frozen level.
So rent control, yeah, maybe you have an affordable rental rate. However, you're sacrificing quality of unit, quality of building, quality of life. I mean, it sounds like and I can understand, we saw this in Seattle, but the neighborhood starts going downhill. No one wants to be there. No one wants to invest there. So you lose all that private care for something that's being overlooked by the government. It's interesting.
Yeah, it's a wet blanket on everything eventually.
Moving to, you'd mentioned development. So the current proposal does not restrict uh, rent control on new development, but wanted to read their myth for that. So they said, myth number 2, if there is rent control, developers will stop building more housing and the crisis will get worse. And Seattle says, historically, New York had some of the largest building booms at times when it had the strictest rent control. And the
Rent
Bay Area
control
never
doesn't
saw.
happen in New York City on the new buildings. That's
Okay.
factually correct. But people are
Yeah.
only building new buildings because that's the only way to not be a part of this rent
Gotcha. So it's
regulatory scheme.
misleading, right? It's like no one
Yes,
can invest money in the existing stock, so they'll invest all their money in the new stock that's anything but affordable.
correct.
Interesting.
Yeah, so
So,
basically the only business plan here, period, for housing is building new. Like
yeah,
there's no kind of like taking care of old buildings unless you buy them
yeah,
at, 8-9% cap rates. I mean, the reason why, again, Signature Bank, it's these laws have basically caused the taxpayer to, everyone's paying more in taxes with FDIC had to, basically cover all the losses for these banks. So someone pays for this eventually. It's just who's
and
paying for it.
I mean, obviously in Manhattan, I don't think we could find any comparable market to Seattle. We're just way too small. But going out into some of the neighborhoods you work in, is it the developers? Is it large institutions or private client, like local developers that are diving in?
Well, that's the other just trend. It's all very professional owners. You cannot do this business anymore as a small to medium sized landlord. It's
Yeah,
impossible.
yeah,
There's too many regulations, there's too many arrows at your back. The only people that can buy are the ones with big salaried operations behind them. It's exactly what you didn't want to happen. You're
yeah,
basically forcing the mom and pops and that keep the fabric of the neighborhood, that we're giving the discounts to tenants because they own the property for 20 or 30 years. You're making it such an unmanageable, hostile environment that they have to sell and give up. And the only people that can buy it are the ones with giant staffs that can handle the 17 different agencies sending letters for this and that every day. So it's a consolidation into the hands of, a fewer and fewer cast of characters that can deal with this much regulation. It's kind of like
yeah.
regulatory capture in some aspects.
Yeah, and we've seen it here. I mean, pre-pandemic, my team was selling a lot of development sites. We've passed so much development regulation in the city of Seattle that I haven't sold a like mid-block, boutique 50 to 100 unit development in several years. We can sell 250 plus unit developments to national groups all day long, but
Mm-hmm.
you get the homogenized product, you get the institutional investor, you get the same thing that everyone else builds. So it really has collapsed the local developer that the city of Seattle paints as these like huge profiteers. I've seen what they make at closing. If they get the timing perfect, it can be pretty incredible. For the most part, they're making a fair return, no more for the
I
risk they're
mean,
taking.
developers deserve every dollar profit that they have. I mean, there's
Yeah,
so much risk, and I mean, if
yeah,
you've ever even experienced a home renovation, imagine building a building. Like there are so many moving parts and so many sleepless nights. I mean, I give all the credit. I mean, to have the chutzpah to even tackle a new development. I mean, it's it's hard work, and it might not work out at the end of a 3-year project. So when it does work out, good for them.
yeah, yeah. I hear you. I want to shift to the last part. So we've got this proposed legislation. I feel, a lot of people feel it's not if, it's when. We can talk about a couple of things that are worth proposing. If you had to meet the legislature and could propose a few things that you thought would be beneficial to everyone. So I think our legislature gets back together in Q1 of 2025. Sounds like some of the moderate people that prevented rent control from passing last year to Senate level, state Senate level, are moving on from their positions. So unless something surprising happens in this upcoming election, it sounds somewhat certain that this statewide proposal will go into effect. So talking to some people in the legislature as well as attorneys, they made a few comments. One was having a carve out for new construction because they don't have that right now. Is that something you'd advocate for?
Yeah, or we have some like in a new construction development now, like you have 30% affordable units in exchange for a tax abatement. So
Yeah.
I think new development should be mixed income. There should
Mm-hmm.
just make sure that the economics are going to work for a developer to build a building, provide that affordable housing part of it in exchange for a tax abatement. It's just you really have to approach those conversations with developers with, an understanding of like economics and okay, here's how these things actually will get built because they're economically solvent versus
Yeah.
oh you're just making too much money like we can't give you anything. So I
Yeah.
think new construction should be exempt to a certain degree, but I actually think any new building should have an abatement or a benefit if you provide 30% of the building to affordable, because we do need to create that.
Yeah.
Um, and that's one way to do it is with tax abatements and incentives. And
So we have that at a city level in Seattle. It's called the Multifamily Tax Exemption Program. It's 12 years of affordability for 20%, 25% of your units, depending on the development type, and then you get an abatement on the taxes on the improvements. But that's at a city level, not at a state level. Do you guys have it statewide or just within the city?
no, just in the city, because the city is
Okay.
such a unique animal. But again,
Yeah.
what are we trying to solve for? We're trying to create, make sure that housing is not only affordable, but it's a upgraded quality of living, right? I think most people, will pay an extra $50 a month for a better product. We all make those choices day in, day out at the grocery store, at what clothes we buy. I mean, let's improve the overall quality of living. That's what capitalism does.
Yeah.
Um, but the way to kind of keep rents affordable is by encouraging and incentivizing supply. People will not be able to raise rents $500 a month if there's a brand new building and brand new buildings being built around it because there's more supply being created. Like that has always been the case. So you don't need to put all these rent restrictions on everything. You just need to actually partner up with development community and encourage, maybe through abatements or any other type of upzoning, whatever it may be, to create more housing. That's how you keep rents flat and keep an
Mm.
economy growing. Now, you just can't have it both ways. You can't put all these restrictions on housing and then vilify property owners and developers, because then you get no supply being created. And then that's what
Yeah.
creates the problem. And then you try to solve for the problem that you created by putting more restrictions on it. And it just feeds
Yeah.
on itself. And then you get
So
to a very wonky place.
obviously, New York City is its own animal. It sounds like, because my next question was about something that was proposed by an attorney I talked to called preemption, that would actually be a statewide rent control and would not allow a more or less progressive city to make rent control more stringent or less. If you had a pick, would you go with a statewide rent control as opposed to each municipality enforcing their own?
If you can, I mean, I don't think as an overall strategy, rent control and rent restrictions work, but I'm not so again, like I think some form of regulation around housing is okay. I mean, there's regulation in everything that we do. It's just to what degree,
Mm-hmm.
I like the fact that there might be somebody watching what is in our food to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want that to just be the wild, wild west. So I just think it has to be, commonsensically approached and not go too far. And when you go too far, you get into a bad spot quickly. And I think you just have to understand the political aspect of saying to constituencies, we're going to freeze your rent, we're going to roll back your rent. It sounds great, and it is. Every free thing is great until there's no more money to pay for that free thing. So the
Mm-hmm.
whole social welfare state, which we need to support, is created by movement and capital and people producing things. And when you cut all that off, again, eventually, like, it's nice to pay for a round at the bar for everybody, but the bar can't do that every single night of the week or the bar goes bankrupt. It
Yeah.
just, the free, nothing in life is free. It just,
Yeah.
people have to pay for things. It's just,
Yeah.
let's get over that.
Yeah. I hear you. Any other, as we close, any other things? Someone mentioned simplifying the permitting process, removing sales tax from new construction, reducing or removing impact fees. I don't know if anything else like that's been proposed or implemented in New York, but we want to see new development in Seattle and the state of Washington. It's really starting to fall off a cliff with concerns about rent control. Anything else you could advocate for?
I just think, again, if you're trying to be honest and you're trying to prevent tenants' rents from being raised, just give it to the owner in the form of a tax abatement. Rents, okay, you can't raise the rent on people more than 7%. If you actually keep the rents the same, we'll reduce your taxes by that 7% amount. But this idea that the burden of doing the government's job of creating affordable housing and putting that burden on property owners without any compensation for it, that's kind of how this whole thing has been shifted
Mm.
in the political sphere. And
Yeah.
that's what you just have to be aware of on an individual basis with what you have and what cities you have and everything else.
Yeah.
Because it's a political trend, and I'm not sure that political trend it's just low hanging fruit.
Yeah. Well, this has been extremely helpful. I mean, especially seeing boots on the ground, how it affects you as a broker representing clients, how it affects your clients who own the properties, you who personally own one. Um, Anything else you want to share or questions I can answer
I
about where
would
we're
say
at?
if some of your 3-cap sellers want to do a 1031 exchange and be the contrarian and play the opposite side of this, sell high and buy low, we're here. Eventually the dam will break and they'll have to change these laws. It's just a question of the old saying, like, if you're right but you're too early, you're still wrong.
Yep.
So these laws are going to change. It's just a
Yeah.
question of when, because they make no sense, and
Yeah.
they're going to bust the system. They're already causing banks to collapse, right? We've seen this like play out nationally. It's getting worse. I thought they would have already changed back to some realm of normalcy, but the pain is kind of priced into New York City now. I mean, when you're talking about these high of cap rates, I mean, we have buildings selling for, you have a 50,000 square foot 60 unit apartment building selling for $5 million, and you have a 5,000 square foot 5-unit building selling for $5 million one block away. Like a 10 times bigger building selling for the same price as a little tiny one, just because of the regulation. It's
So
literally
why is the
just
small one not regulated?
because we had a restriction. Anything 5 units and under wasn't subject to this garbage nonsense. So these tiny little properties are worth like the same amount as like these giant ones. It's like what the, it just makes no sense.
Wow.
Crazy.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Well, thanks.
if you're out there listening and you want to see some of my pre-rent loss setups, and you want
Yeah.
to see what the prices that were, and now you want to see the exact same stuff and what it's like after 5 years of laws being priced in, happy to show you the compare and contrast. But
Yeah.
good luck to the players. That's all I got to tell you.
Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it, Shaun.
No problem. Good seeing you.